Hi there. I will be presenting on the various representations of Hmong boyhood we see popularly around us. Originally, I wanted to research how Hmong boys are represented in public education, but I actually found tons of overlap in the way schools treat Hmong boys and how society treats Hmong boys. So since Hmong boyhood fits into the age group of school age kids, I decided to broaden my topic and draw from examples inside and outside of educational settings. So let's get started. My overarching research question is, how do popular representations of Hmong boys empower and disempower them? I was drawn to this question because I've noticed lots of recurring patterns and even tropes in the experiences of Hmong boys we've seen across the semester. So I wanted to gather the representations I've seen of Hmong boys thus far and find some more representations to search for more similarities and or differences. Especially in the second half of the semester, our class has taken more of a focus on the experiences and representations of Hmong women, and I think examining those intersectional identities are super important, but I've noticed that the ways Hmong girls are represented is usually very different from the ways Hmong boys are represented. So in short, I really wanted to complicate what I already know and have seen about Hmong boys. Before I can make any definite claims and start dissecting some examples, I did some research on how Hmong boys are racialized differently than Hmong girls, and how representations or misrepresentations of Hmong boyhood have lasting impacts. There was tons of discussion and scholarship targeted at Hmong representations of race and gender, but I narrowed down my discussion into three main articles. I researched Carrie Smakulski's Hmong Male Youth and School Choice in a Neoliberal era, Louisa Shine's Ideological Blackening, Masculinity and Comparative Racialization, and Gran Torino's Boys and Men with Gun, also written by Louisa Shine. I'll discuss briefly the main ideas of each article. Starting out with Smakulski's findings. In general, data shows that Hmong males are lagging behind Hmong females in schooling. Hmong boys are significantly more likely to drop out of school, while Hmong girls are more likely to go to college. While there are a ton of reasons for why that might be, Smakulski believes that a major reason is a difference in perception and treatment by K through 12 teachers. While Hmong children all around are subject to harmful stereotypes, the type of stereotypes they're associated with tends to correlate with their gender. I've listed here some of the words teachers use to describe their Hmong students. Words like motivated, engaged, organized, respectful, and hardworking are used to describe the girls, while words like unmotivated, disengaged, unsocial, worse at English, and even slow have been used to describe Hmong boys. Hmong girls are more likely to be swept into the model minority stereotype, and Hmong boys are more likely to be pushed into the perpetual foreigner stereotype. The girls are high achieving and better at assimilating, while the boys struggle and are alienated. Smakulski continues to note that Hmong boys face more bullying and harassment at school. So when they stick together or defend themselves, they're interpreted as gangs with violent, isolated, and unsocial intentions. This develops a concept we've discussed throughout the semester that Hmong girls are more associated with whiteness and Hmong boys are more associated with blackness. The ideological blackening of Hmong boys is elaborated on more in Louisa Shine's article. From a social standpoint, Hmong girls are seen through a more positive light because their traits are associated with goodness and therefore whiteness. They're smart, they care about school, they're quiet, they're docile, the list goes on. Though these expectations are built off of stereotypes and don't run true for all Hmong girls, they still exist and impact their outcomes. The same can be said about the expectations of Hmong boys, except in the opposite direction. Hmong boys are seen through a more negative light because their traits are associated with badness and therefore blackness. They're foreigners, they don't belong, they're mad, they're dangerous. Hmong boys are racialized in a way that disadvantages their standing in the public eye. Louisa Shine uses the case of Dylan Yang as an excellent example of this. Dylan Yang was a 16-year-old Hmong boy who stabbed and killed a black boy who was threatening him, but their case was super complicated and his guilt was unclear. Yet when the media got a hold of the case, they actively demonized him. They said he had a proclivity to violence, called him a gangster, and urged he be tried as an adult, effectively blackening the representations of his character. I'll be speaking more on this case later. Shine's other article continues to build on the representations of violence in Hmong men. She goes on to explain that this stereotype extends back to Hmong involvements in the Vietnam War. Hmong boys are popularly misrepresented as perpetual warriors, dysfunctional men who are too violent for civilization. This racist stereotype reinforces negative opinions, increased police violence, and tries to justify why Hmong boys are ill-matched for US society. Shine responds to the way this trope manifests in Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino, which associates correct masculinity with whiteness and violent masculinity with Hmongness. She says, what is accomplished by genericizing the Hmong as guerrilla warriors or as warriors by spirit is that such warriorhood is instilled in them as characters. Making Hmong boys appear innately violent lends itself to your typical white savior storyline, allowing whiteness to continually be lifted up and Hmongness to be pushed down. I'll continue to discuss Gran Torino later on. But for now, I have a pretty solid understanding of the scholarship around Hmong boyhood. The US social structures have a history of placing Hmong youth in boxes that leave them marginalized and disadvantaged. Throughout the course of the semester, we've discussed a variety of texts that represent Hmong people in ways that both empower and disempower them. To come to these conclusions, one needs to consider who the texts were made by and who the texts were made for. I spent a long time thinking about what makes a representation positive and what makes one negative, but even after my research, I was still unsure why some texts raise awareness of Hmong youth stereotypes, while others contribute to them. So after examining a bunch of representations, I believe I put my finger on the difference between empowering and disempowering representations. I argue that the way popular representations of Hmong boyhood frame their experiences makes all the difference in empowering and disempowering them. A text that is empowering displays Hmong boyhood in the context of racism, histories of trauma, and refugee mindsets. They work to humanize, not villainize, Hmong boys. Any maladaptive behaviors are viewed as a response to their social stakes, not their personal desires to do evil. A text that is disempowering pretty much does the opposite. It places blame on Hmong boys for not assimilating well enough, looks past or ignores historical pressures placed on them, and contributes to harmful stereotypes like the perpetual warrior and perpetual foreigner. In essence, the way Hmong boyhood is or isn't contextualized alters the way it represents them. Let's get into the details. Evidence 1. The Voices of the Silenced. This documentary as a whole spends time highlighting the previous educational experience of Hmong college students. We get to hear their first-hand experiences as well as gain a sociological understanding of the way Hmong youth are treated from professors like Dr. Kristen DePauw. I paired her article, Critical Race Theory in Hmong American Education, with this slide because it goes hand in hand with the major ideas of this text. The main findings of her article is that Hmong children often lack the academic language to describe the way they're treated, and teaching them about it tends to be an empowering experience. Ideas like blackening, primitivization, refugee status, and systemic racism can be used to describe the experiences of Hmong boys. The student on the left speaks about how lonely his education has felt. Not getting the chance to learn about his heritage in a public space alienated him from different groups and made him much more difficult to make meaningful connections. The student on the right speaks about the barriers he faced in his schooling. Despite being in the top 10% of his class, he recalls being seen as less capable and forced to prove his proficiency in various subjects. The speakers in this documentary call out how the education system tries to individualize their experiences and blame culture to mask institutional racism. In doing so, the blame can shift from Hmong boys not trying enough to a system that is designed to disadvantage them. Raising awareness of the social climate impacting Hmong boys empowers them to challenge and rise above it. Evidence 2. Gran Torino. Gran Torino tells the story of a Hmong boy torn between two worlds, the solidarity of a Hmong gang, and the more socially acceptable friendship with an old white man. At the end of the day, Tao decides to do what's right and become a hard-working member of society. After the release of the film, tons of people believed it was empowering for Hmong people. A Hmong boy was able to defy all odds and become good. He was tempted to join the dark side, a gang full of guns and violence, but opted against it. As displayed by the film, Hmong boyhood and violence are apparently synonymous. As Tao's sister Sue aptly says, girls go to school and boys go to jail. Although this feel-good white story seems good for Tao, it lifts him up at the expense of all other Hmong boys. The movie never once mentions the history of the Secret War, never once shed light on the marginalization of Hmong boys, never once tries to rationalize why Hmong boys feel safer near one another. Instead, it sticks to the narrative that girls are better at assimilating than boys. The narrative that Hmong boys are perpetual warriors, that they'll never fit in. Without the context of trauma to explain gang behavior, the movie sends the message that Tao was destined for violence and had White Walt not intervened and essentially saved him. Clint Eastwood individualized Tao's story. Instead of looking at the social barriers and institutional structures that impact Hmong boyhood, the film ignores these ideas and reinforces these negative stereotypes. By forcing Hmong boyhood into a monolith, Gran Torino disempowers them. Evidence 3. Works by Kalia Yang, the song poet and Where Rivers Part. Kalia Yang is a Hmong American author who documents the experience of her family's history in Laos and their lives as refugees in the United States. Although she has many sisters, I found the experience of her first brother, Shu, to stand out the most to me. In Chapter 7, The Sun Must Rise of the Song Poet, Yang tells the story of Shu's dealing with extreme bullying that causes him to drop out of high school. Compared to his sisters, Shu always seems to struggle in school. His grades were usually lower and he struggled more to keep up with his peers. As one of the only Hmong boys in his suburban classroom, he starts getting racialized and bullied by his peers. On page 184, one student said to him, "Go back to your homeland, fatso." Over the years, Shu would get into fights at school, keep getting beat up, and keep getting suspended, eventually deciding to drop out altogether. In Where Rivers Parts, Shu's bullying is only briefly touched on, but the success of his sisters is described in detail. Kalia's sisters thrive in educational settings, getting into extremely competitive schools, while Shu is a high school dropout. This drives his parents, B and Shu, absolutely mad. At first glance, Kalia's representations of Hmong boyhood seem to fit the stereotypes I discussed before. Hmong girls thrive in school and Hmong boys don't. Hmong girls succeed and Hmong boys are driven to violence. There's even the stereotype of the strict Asian parent. However, Kalia frames her brother's story in the context of disadvantage. The bullying he faced was a product of racism. The violence Shu enacted was a result of self-defense, and the punishments he faced was a result of racialization and disproportionate punishment by a biased system. B and Shu's distress of him dropping out came from a place of generational trauma, a place of seeing education as a chance to get ahead, a need for their children to be better off than them. The context of tragedy that Kalia Yang includes in her work to bring up the injustice her brother faced is what makes it so empowering. Evidence 4. The Case of Dylan Yang. So as I discussed before, Dylan Yang's case was incredibly complicated. In 2016, 15-year-old Dylan Yang got in a fight online with 13-year-old Isaiah Powell, who threatened his family. Powell showed up at Yang's house with a BB gun and a group of boys and began fighting with Yang's friends, which caused him to grab a kitchen knife and stab Powell in the back twice, killing him. His defense claimed self-defense, while the prosecution claimed murder. I found 2 articles that cover Dylan Yang's case that depict him in strikingly different ways. Dylan Yang, Unlikely Focus of Wausau Hmong Community's 40th Year, by Glenn Moberg, depicts Yang as a criminal, while Justice System Made Dylan Yang a Monster, by Pao Vu, depicts him as a victim. Moberg's article includes lots of statements by Yang's main prosecutor that run him into the ground, Prosecutor Leslie Pluster painted Yang as a gang member who committed a vicious crime against a 13-year-old boy who never saw it coming. She says, "He received 2 deep, hard stab wounds, one of them hard enough to lodge into his spine," Pluster said, "and he was stabbed to death in front of his closest friends." They bring up Yang's history of marijuana and delinquency to make out his character. When Yang supporters rallied to demand justice for him, the Moberg article used the word raucous to describe them. On the other hand, the Vu article recognizes how the media portrays Vang and expresses fear of an unjust trial. The article questions why a 15-year-old boy is tried as an adult, why people call him a gangster when there's very little evidence of gang-relatedness. The article also details Yang's long history of bullying and discrimination. They include a statement from Yang's mother. She says, "I feel as though my son, Dylan, has been painted by the legal system and media as a monster, someone so different from the child I raised and know." In a call to his mother, Yang said, "Mom, they make me sound like a monster. I feel like a wild animal that they have to cage up. Am I a monster?" The difference between these two articles is that Moberg takes Yang's behavior at face value. He sees crime and violence and a clear guilt. Vu's article, however, considers the history that led up to Yang's outburst, the systems that impact him, and the popular opinions pinned against him. Although both writers had the same information, one disempowers Hmong boys, and the other empowers them. So just to wrap things up, my main argument was that the contextualization any given text offers helps make the difference between an empowering and a disempowering text for Hmong boys. Empowering texts tend to bring up and criticize or raise awareness of institutional racism, refugee identities, and historical traumas that impact Hmong boys. On the opposite end of the spectrum, disempowering texts try to place Hmong boys into a status quo of harmful stereotypes. Blackening, perpetual warrior, and perpetual foreigner stereotypes continue to represent Hmong boys in harmful ways. Instead of searching for societal explanations, their behavior is minimized to personal choice, individual experiences, and cultural differences. So with this in mind, it appears that representations of Hmong boyhood rely less on actual Hmong boyhood and more on what people think they know about Hmong boyhood, whether that be personal experiences or social conditioning. Here are my works cited. Thank you for listening.